Sometimes we don't miss the past, we just missed a version of ourselves that felt more alive back then. In this video, I want to explore why we romanticize the past and why, especially if we come from a sort of goth or subculture, why that nostalgia hits so hard and how we can use that to maybe explore our future as opposed to kind of getting stuck romanticizing the past. Nostalgia filters out the mundane and the painful. It focuses on the good parts. You don't think about how broke you were or how bad your foot hurt that night when you were out at the club. Memory a lot of time is reconstructed, and when we recall the past, we're not really recalling exactly what happened. We're recalling the feeling and the emotion, and every time we revisit that, we actually kind of rewrite it when we're romanticizing it. The golden era is in a sense, a feeling more than exact details, even though we like to believe that our memories are correct. As you know, we get older, you start questioning them too, and thinking about how many times you revisit them and how it kind of alters them. It's very interesting to wonder how much of your memory is exactly how it was, and how much of it is just sort of a dream of what you wished it was. And the truth is we're not longing for the events. We're really longing for how we felt. And a lot of times we wrap that up in, man, I missed that particular night. But it really wasn't about that night. It was about who you were that night. Sometimes we cling to the past because as a youth, we're more involved in our becoming and our trying to define who we are and our experiences. It's not that it was necessarily objectively better back then, but we were maybe more actively involved in ourselves. As time moves on, you become, bogged down with a lot of different things going on in life. And sometimes, a lot of, especially mothers, people that lose focus on themselves, you miss that aspect of it. Nostalgia can often be a signal that there's a part of who we really are that we've kind of abandoned. It's not that you miss that old decade, it's you miss kind of where your head was at during that decade. Maybe that youth, that freedom or that unknown of the future. Sometimes we cling to that, or we find that memory, for some reason, I guess feels more alive than looking at the future as an elder. Although I would think all the wisdom and his stuff would make us look a little bit more wiser and, experience and feel excited about what we can do with all the knowledge we have. But kind of that's why I'm sort of talking about this, is because I'm trying to figure out where the line of using nostalgia for your future as opposed to just using it as a way to sort of play a rerun of something you miss. Because, in your late teens and your early 20s, you're really experiencing feelings for the first time. It's your first heartbreaks, your first arguments with your besties, things that you really feel you're finally an adult and you're really experimenting with adult feelings, adult experiences. And those lay the groundwork for how you kind of express yourself for the rest of your life. All of that intensity imprints so deeply on us. This period becomes just romanticized because it was when we were creating our power, when we were doing our becoming, when we were really believed in what the future might offer for us. And then bring in the fact that we're goth and into subculture, it brings this whole other sense of community that we were missing. The music, the late nights, the dancing, it wasn't just fun, it was ritual. And that kind of belonging becomes difficult as you age. We all become a little more distant. We have work, we have jobs, we have kids, we have family. So that very important part of community that was helping us become, we always look back at that as being a very important part of belonging. First club, first lover, first heartbreak, first night you stepped into a smoky room and felt seen. Firsts are always neurologically stronger and they imprint on your brain. That's why later experiences just seem so much less explosive, You've already have these you're already layered with all these old pathways of beliefs at this point. So sometimes nostalgia can be actually a sign of grief. Grief for the person you were, grief for relationships that faded, maybe grief for a body that did not hurt. and grief for time because it's something that we never get back. We mourn the past because it's so finite, even if it is totally imperfect. And missing it doesn't mean you need to go back to it. It's more that you just acknowledge that it mattered. As we age, responsibilities increase. Our ability to socialize becomes a little more faded. Your identity kind of calcifies on who you are and what you feel comfortable doing. And that makes the unknown feel even scarier. Remember when you were young, the unknown didn't always feel scary. It was more exciting. So a lot of times if you have that grief, you're going to retreat to the past because it feels safer there. The past can't reject us, but the future might. And sometimes nostalgia can become like a filter against growth. And then we idolize the old days because they require no vulnerability. But I feel like I like to use nostalgia in a way to kind of access parts of who I was that were always there. I like looking back at my memories and my youth through the lens of experience and to sort of reinterpret them. And a lot of times you find out, like, those horrible breakups you've had where you were like, that person was such an asshole. And then you look back years later and you're like, I think I was the asshole. That's the beauty of nostalgia and memory, I think, for me, is to be able to sort of like use the filter I have of the experiences I have now and take what I've learned about who I still am, because you really find out, that's the whole thing, is you start out in your 20s and you're like trying to figure out who you are. And then you get into your 30s and your 40s and you're like, well, life's complicated now. I'm not like just a goth person. I'm all these other things. And sometimes we move away from like our identity that we really held on to as youth, because obviously you learn that identity isn't just wrapped up in your music, your style, and who you hang out with. It's just who you are. So you don't necessarily need to show it all the time and prove it all the time. As you get older, you get a little more comfortable in your identity. But where was I going with this? Sometimes we just end up feeling like obligated to do something else or be a different person. I'm 38 now. I'm way too old to be this little kid's interests anymore. And then you realize once you get a little older that you're like, wait, I've always been that person. That hadn't changed. And, the spark is still in me. You don't have to let it die. I hear so many people who go like, oh, it wasn't until I had children that I was able to look at the world through the eyes of a child again. And I've always said, I don't ever want to be like that. I don't ever want to miss seeing the world through the eyes of a child. I don't have any children. So it definitely, you have to work on it, but you can always have a positive kind of outlook, but it's definitely something you have to work at. So it's kind of cool to sort of like, as you age, to circle back around to who you were when you were younger, and really maybe even because you have more confidence or more experience, you're able to grab all the things about who you wanted to be back then and maybe even elevate it more because you have this new lens of experience, and it just brings a little bit more confidence to yourself than that sort of youthful, I don't know who I am, but I want to be somebody. So it's like we don't have to like retreat to the past. We can just like bring it forward with us. That's what I feel that I'm doing as I'm entering my elder years. I want to bring that energy into who I am now. I can dress how I want. I can go to shows. I can listen to music. But now I can do it with depth and wisdom and an emotional grounding that I didn't have when I was young. Nostalgia should not be a cage, it should be a compass. Because my channel is so focused on looking back at nostalgia and music and things from the past that shaped me, I feel like it's important to just touch a little bit about where memory is and what nostalgia means and how we're using it. Because we can honor that part of our life without living there. And like I said, nostalgia is not a time machine, it's a compass. And I feel that as I'm aging, I am diving deeper into all the different stages of my life, all the nostalgia that brought me there. I love using nostalgia to trigger those memories, to look back on, like, to just be able to like maybe taste how I felt in that moment. But there's just so much that's happened since then that I cannot help but look at it through a different lens. So Let me know, does that speak to you at all? Does anyone feel that this touched them in any way? Can you relate to any of this? Let me know, and let me know how you're using nostalgia to better yourself as an elder. Or maybe you're a baby bat that's using other people's nostalgia to sort of understand yourself. And you can already, even as a youngster, look back and start kind of like assessing your childhood even, you know. I wish I had been able to do that when I was young. But yeah, we all get there at different times. So welcome. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, I do have a Etsy collector collection that's like all 90s goth nostalgia items that I just put in there in case you ever want to pick up something that reminds you of the 90s to help trigger those memories. There's like chokers and candy necklaces. There's been a dress there that's like the typical 90s velvet dress that I might just scoop up if nobody else does. Thank you so much for watching. Check out our brand Bones in Black, and also subscribe, check out other videos if any of this nostalgia stuff hits for you. And I will see you on the proverbial dance floor. Oh shit. Whoa.